who will be your partner. Kim Huybrechts, of course, was here this week playing. Have you had a chance to have a word with him about how he's feeling, how his injury is right now?
I wasn't interested in anything of that. Everybody needs to know that me and Kim are not the best friends, and that's period.
You play like, I can't lose to this guy. This guy just...
Ooh, Dimitri van Bergh.
Why?
Because he's in my pocket.
Behind the smooth dance moves and big finishes, Dimitri van Bergh has a list of rivals he just can't seem to get along with. From icy stares on the biggest stage to teammates who turned into enemies, these are the 5 players Dimitri van Bergh truly can't stand. On paper, the Belgian pair of Dimitri van Bergh and Kim Huybrechts should have been a dream team, 2 of the country's finest darting talents, united under the same flag. But what played out on the World Cup stage looked more like a thriller than a team partnership. The tension between them didn't begin on television, it had been simmering for a while. Kim, the veteran, had long carried the weight of Belgian darts. He was fiery, emotional, and worn from years in the spotlight. Then came Dimitri, smooth, stylish, and relentless in his rise. New comparisons emerged, the seasoned star versus the young firebrand. Kim's form slumped just as Dimitri soared, driving a wedge between them. Allegedly, words were said. Kim thought Dimitri had distanced himself, and Dimitri implied that Kim was hard to work with. When the World Cup arrived in 2023, headlines weren't about their scoring, they were about their silence. On stage, they didn't chat, didn't smile, didn't even bother with a fist bump. At one match, Huybrechts landed a big shot and Dimitri didn't even nod. It wasn't just awkward, it was public, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. The whispers got louder. Rumors started about their partners, some said the wives were even feuding. Kim's wife, Dana Verhagen, later moved to calm the gossip, insisting there was no hatred between the men, even if they weren't close. But the tension was real. Dartsnews.com reported that Dimitri had filed an official complaint against Kim, hinting at deeper issues beneath the surface. Despite the hostility, they managed to play well enough to reach the semi-finals, proof that, on the Oki, talent can sometimes override personal friction. There was even one rare, awkward celebration where they hugged, giving the impression that maybe, just maybe, real Belgian-bound teamwork had returned, if only for a moment. Moments later, Dimitri punctured that illusion. When asked about their relationship, he didn't sugarcoat it. Everybody needs to know that me and Kim are not best friends, and that's period. No fluff, no fence-sitting, just a clear message that whatever warmth may have flickered under the floodlights, it wasn't friendship. So what's the truth behind the feud? It's layered. Professional rivalry, clashing egos, media comparisons, even their significant others became unwitting players in a drama neither may have asked for. The result? A partnership that looked like combat, and a feud that turned every Belgian appearance into must-watch TV. But if this was the Cold War of teammates, what happened next against one of darts' greatest was much hotter and more damaging than anyone expected. The 2023 World Darts Championship semi-final was supposed to be the night Dimitri van Bergh proved he could stand toe-to-toe with the best in the world. Instead, it turned into one of the most talked about matches of his career, because it wasn't just about the darts, it was about the mind games. From the opening legs, Dimitri looked sharp, throwing with confidence and energy. But then, something unusual happened. After releasing a dart, he suddenly stopped, looked over, and refused to continue. The reason? Michael van Gerwen, standing just behind him, was a little too close for comfort. In that moment, the crowd didn't quite know what was happening. Some thought Dimitri was just taking a breather, but as the camera zoomed in, it became clear. He wasn't throwing because he felt van Gerwen was encroaching on his space. The Belgian shook his head, walked back, and made it obvious he wasn't happy. Now, van Gerwen is no stranger to the psychological side of darts. He's known for his intensity, his presence, and the way he dominates the stage without saying a word. But this was different. Here was Dimitri, mid-match, essentially calling him out. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was visible to millions, a standoff between 2 players on the biggest stage of all. The pause stretched long enough for the tension to sink in. Dimitri refused to throw until Michael adjusted his stance, forcing the Dutchman to step further back. It was a moment that summed up everything about the semi-final. It wasn't just about scoring, it was about space, dominance, and control. But if Dimitri thought that rattling van Gerwen would give him an edge, he was mistaken, because what followed was nothing short of brutal. Van Gerwen locked in, hitting massive checkouts and throwing with the kind of clinical precision that makes him one of the most feared players in history. At one point, he nailed a 170 finish, the ultimate show of confidence, almost as if to say, you can worry about where I'm standing, but I'll just keep winning. And from there, the match slipped completely out of Dimitri's hands. Leg after leg, set after set, Van Gerwen piled on the pressure. The Belgian looked shaken, his rhythm broken, his focus slipping. What began as a subtle dispute over space turned into a nightmare performance, with Dimitri failing to win a single set. The final score? 6-0, a whitewash, in the semi-final of the World Championship on the sport's biggest stage. The crowd erupted for Van Gerwen, but for Dimitri it was a crushing moment, not just because of the scoreline, but because the entire darts world had seen the tension boil over between him and one of the sport's greats. Even afterwards, the story didn't die down. Reporters pushed Van Gerwen on the incident, asking if he had been deliberately standing too close. His reply was classic MVG, sharp, dismissive, and a little cutting. He told journalists to get your facts right, making it clear he wasn't going to entertain the idea that he'd done anything wrong. For him, the result spoke for itself.
And as well, I think Dimmy felt that you were encroaching his space slightly. What was your take on that?
I don't really know what his problem was, but you have to concentrate yourself towards your own game, and that's exactly what I did then. Then games can get tense, but you need to focus yourself, and that's exactly what I did then. He probably said I was stamping whatsoever, but he was losing the game, so he had to say something.
For Dimitri though, it was another chapter in a growing reputation, a player who lets rivalries, distractions, and personal battles spill onto the stage. Fans were divided. Some saw him as a victim of gamesmanship, others thought he'd let the pressure get to him. But one thing was certain, this wasn't just another semi-final, it was a clash of personalities, and Dimitri came out of it with more questions than answers. And while that defeat was humiliating enough, it wasn't the last time Dimitri's behavior would spark boos, controversy, and frustration from both players and fans alike. If the clash with Michael van Gerwen was all about space, the showdown with Luke Humphries was all about time. And in darts, timing is everything. The 2024 UK Open final had all the makings of a classic. Dimitri van den Bergh, chasing one of the biggest titles of his career, faced Luke Humphries, the reigning world champion and a man in unstoppable form. For fans, it was billed as a heavyweight battle. But what they didn't expect was for the drama to come not just from the darts, but from Dimitri's behavior on stage. For much of the match, the two traded blows. Humphries fired in heavy scoring while Dimitri responded with his trademark coolness and clinical finishing. But then, at a crucial moment with the score 10-8 in Dimitri's favour, something happened that changed the atmosphere completely. Instead of stepping up to throw, Dimitri stopped, walked back to his table and grabbed his water. Not just a quick sip, he stood there slowly drinking, wiping his mouth, pacing himself like he had all the time in the world. The crowd, already buzzing with tension, began to turn. At first it was murmurs, then whistles, and then outright boos. Fans had seen slow play before, but this was on another level. Humphries, standing behind him, looked visibly annoyed. The camera caught his face tightening, his head shaking, his lips pressed into a thin line. He wanted to get on with the match. He wanted rhythm. But Dimitri wasn't giving him any, and whether it was mind games, nerves, or strategy, one thing was clear. Dimitri had thrown the final into chaos. When he finally stepped back to the oki, the noise from the crowd was deafening. Boos mixed with cheers, every dart thrown under pressure, not just from the opponent, but from thousands of restless fans. And it seemed to work against him. Dimitri had chances to seal the match, but he faltered. 6 match darts came and went, and Humphries pounced, dragging the final into a nail-biting deciding leg. At that point, it felt like the crowd had chosen sides. Every dart Humphries threw was cheered. Every pause from Dimitri was booed. For a player used to dancing on stage and feeding off energy, it was a hostile environment, and you could see it in his face. Nervous, tense, desperate to prove he wasn't choking. But here's where the story flipped again. In that sudden death leg, with everything on the line, Dimitri found the darts he needed. He steadied himself, blocked out the noise, and finally crossed the finish line. Victory was his, the UK Open champion, in dramatic fashion. Yet even in victory, the story wasn't about his success, it was about his tactics. Fans on social media lit up with criticism, calling him out for gamesmanship, saying he'd tried to slow Luke down, that he'd spoiled the rhythm of the match on purpose. Some said it was clever, others said it was cheap. But no one ignored it, and in the world of YouTube retention, that's gold. For Humphries, it was a bitter pill to swallow. He'd been on the verge of a comeback for the ages, only to fall just short. For Dimitri, it was a career-defining win, but one clouded by controversy. Instead of being remembered for the trophy, people remembered the water bottle, the pause, the boos, and the near collapse. And that's the paradox of Dimitri van Bergh. Even when he wins, it's not always clean. There's drama, there's tension, there's something for people to talk about long after the darts are over. But not every rivalry comes from tense finals or slow play. Sometimes the hardest hits come from friends, especially when that friendship suddenly disappears. Not every rivalry is born from an onstage incident. Sometimes it's the breakdown of a friendship that cuts the deepest. And that's exactly what happened between Dimitri van Bergh and Peter Wright. Go back to 2020, and their relationship looked like one of the most wholesome stories in darts. When the world shut down during the pandemic, Dimitri actually moved in with Peter Wright and his wife, Jo. For months, he lived under the same roof as the reigning world champion. They practiced together every day, they ate together, and they even shared little moments away from the oki, almost like family. At the time, Dimitri spoke with nothing but admiration. He called Peter a role model, praised his quality as a player, and credited those long practice sessions for sharpening his own game. In fact, many people believe that living with Wright during lockdown was one of the biggest factors in Dimitri's rise, because just weeks later, he shocked the darts world by winning the 2020 World Match Play, his first ever major title. To outsiders, it looked like Wright had taken him under his wing, almost like a mentor helping a younger player find his feet. But what looked like an unbreakable bond didn't last. Fast forward to late 2022, and the mood between the two couldn't have been more different. Suddenly, the warmth was gone. The practice partner had turned into a stranger. On stage, Wright barely acknowledged Dimitri, even after big matches. Fans picked up on it instantly, noticing how distant they seemed compared to just a year or two earlier. And then came the interviews. Dimitri, usually so upbeat when talking about Wright, admitted that things had changed. He felt ignored, left out, and disappointed that the man he once called a close friend had gone cold. For Wright's part, he brushed it off in his own way, saying the distance wasn't personal, claiming he was just more disappointed in myself after some of his own poor performances. But to many, it sounded like deflection, as if he didn't want to talk about what really went wrong. Whatever the truth, it was clear, something had cracked. These weren't just two professionals who drifted apart, they had gone from housemates and practice partners to barely speaking at all. And in darts, where mental edges matter as much as averages, that kind of fallout lingers. Fans still debate what actually caused the rift. Was it competition? Was it jealousy? Did the mentor-student dynamic collapse once Dimitri started beating big names on his own? Neither man has ever given a full explanation, but the silence speaks volumes. For two players who once looked inseparable, the sudden distance was shocking. And the strangest part? Unlike other rivalries that explode with drama on stage, like Dimitri's feuds with Van Gerwen or Humphries, this one fizzled quietly, almost painfully. No shouting, no public blow-up, just a friendship that vanished, leaving fans guessing. Today, when Dimitri and Peter face off, there's no handshake that feels warm, no smile that suggests they've patched things up. Just two players, once close as brothers, now locked in a silence that says more than words ever could. But while that fallout was quiet and sad, Dimitri's next clash was anything but. Because when he took a shot at Callan Rydz, it backfired in the loudest way possible. By the time Dimitri van Bergh met Callan Rydz on the World Championship stage, he had already developed a reputation, talented, unpredictable, and never far from drama. But this rivalry didn't even start on the oki, it started with words. Before their match, Dimitri made a comment that sent shockwaves through the darts community. He called Rydz unstable. Just one word, but it landed like a dart straight to the chest. For Rydz, a player already fighting to prove himself on the biggest stage, it was insulting, dismissive, and deeply personal. And instead of breaking him, it lit a fire. From the moment the walk-ons began, you could feel the energy. Dimitri, as always, came out with his trademark dance moves, smiling and bouncing to the beat. But Rydz? He looked locked in, eyes narrowed, shoulders tense like a man with a point to prove. The contrast couldn't have been more clear. Dimitri playing the entertainer, Rydz burning with focus. And when the match began, it didn't take long for that focus to show. Rydz came out firing, trebles, checkouts, and heavy scoring that Dimitri simply couldn't match. Leg after leg slipped away, and with each dart, the weight of Dimitri's pre-match words grew heavier. The unstable player looked anything but. By the halfway point, it was clear this wasn't going to be a battle, it was a dismantling. Dimitri tried to rally, but his usual rhythm wasn't there. He missed doubles, lost his composure, and looked more and more frustrated as Rydz piled on the pressure. Every missed chance from Dimitri was met with cheers for Rydz, and every big finish from the Englishman felt like payback for that single word. The final result? Brutal. A 4-0 whitewash. Dimitri didn't just lose, he was humiliated. Rydz had taken his insult, turned it into fuel, and delivered one of the most dominant performances of his career.
I knew what he was going to do. I knew he was going to try and not slow us down, but compose himself. But I knew it was coming, so I was ready for every little thing that was coming.
And it didn't end when the last dart landed. In the post-match press conference, Rydz made his feelings clear. He admitted that Dimitri's unstable remark had fired him up, and at one point he even joked about walking out of the interview, almost like he was saying, "What else is there to say? I've proved my point." For fans, it was a moment of pure drama, the perfect example of how Dimitri's words and actions can sometimes come back to haunt him. He tried to unsettle his opponent before the first dart was thrown, but instead, he'd created a monster. And perhaps that's the story of Dimitri van den Bergh in a nutshell. A player who dances on stage, who loves the spotlight, but who can't seem to escape the rivalries, feuds, and controversies that follow him. Against Callan Rydz, it was his own mouth that cost him, not his darts. And when you look back at all of these rivalries, from teammates who turned into enemies, to friends who became strangers, to opponents who used his words against him, you start to wonder, is Dimitri van den Bergh creating these battles himself, or are they just the price he pays for being one of the sport's most unpredictable stars? From Kim Huybrechts to Michael van Gerwen, from Luke Humphries to Peter Wright, and finally Callan Rydz, Dimitri van den Bergh's career has been marked as much by rivalries as by trophies. Each story tells you something different. Awkward silence with a teammate, icy standoffs with a legend, boos from the crowd, friendships lost, and words that came back to haunt him. And that's what makes Dimitri such a fascinating figure in darts. He isn't just another player who shows up, throws his darts, and goes home. He's someone who brings drama with him, sometimes by accident, sometimes by design. You never quite know if he's going to light up the stage with brilliance or set it on fire with controversy. The question fans are left asking is this: are these feuds proof that Dimitri thrives on chaos, using it to fuel his best performances, or are they the cracks that hold him back from reaching true greatness? Either way, one thing's for sure, when Dimitri van den Bergh is on stage, you're never just watching darts. You're watching a story unfold, full of tension, emotion, and unpredictable twists. And that's exactly why fans can't look away.